Hey, everybody. Welcome to Kurt's podcast. Can we hear me? I think you can hear me. You should be able to hear me. I am looking at my microphone now, and it shows that you can hear me. So I think you can hear me. I think I fixed the microphone issues, which plague me in perpetuity, everybody. As a tech entrepreneur and tech founder, nothing makes me more upset than the fact that I consistently have these pretty basic tech issues. But it is what it is, and the good Lord keeps me humble by keeping me strapped in, everybody. So thank you for tuning in. If you could please like, subscribe, and hit the alert bell, I would appreciate it if you would tune in every single Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Kurt's podcast. Who's Kurt? This Kurt. Hey, everybody. Really good to have you here. If you are watching live, please let everybody know that we are going to be taking questions from the chat. And that can be on any topic. That can be on, the news and views of the day, what's going on in headlines, breaking news stuff. You want to talk a little bit about the war going on, or politics, religion, mixed martial arts. You want to talk about what's going on in your neighborhood. Did Alan Richson beat up a British guy because he deserved it, or because he's a roid rage psycho? We'll find out. Everybody, also, how as I look at myself on screen, I'm seeing a little bit of delay. How is my mouth synchronized to the sound? If you could let me know a little bit of feedback about that, I would also appreciate the feedback here as I make sure I've got all of my stuff queued up properly and everything's all set. Looks like I'm getting all goods from everybody. Shepard, thank you. BSV Casey, thank you for tuning in. Ram G, way to go. I'm really glad to have you. So, interesting development. If you have not read my article at kurtwookertjr.com, I published on Monday. Actually, it might have been Sunday night, so my night owls could give it a read in their own time. Oh man, I don't have my cross showing. Here's my Jerusalem cross. Everybody, gotta give my shout out to Jesus, even if it's pretty quiet. So everybody, if you read my article about Tether, the Beyond Fraud article, I talk about a whole bunch of stuff that a lot of people are aware of. If you've read the Bitfinex account on X for many, many years, since like 2017, he's been very clear about what he thinks is going on with Tether and the fraud. There's also guys like Bennett Tomlin, and more lately, Corey Swan, who's a guy that I don't particularly like and does not particularly like me, has also been talking quite a bit about the Tether fraud and its relation to Howard Lutnick and the Trump administration. And while, actually, I should start by saying that Donald Trump, I'm pretty pragmatic on Donald Trump. Okay, I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat, and I don't particularly like a lot of the nonsense that goes into partisan politics in general. In general, I look at both parties as generally authoritarian and opportunist, and I think the opportunism is what feeds the authoritarianism, because most people want to be governed, and most people don't question the fact that they're governed in the first place. And so it makes a whole lot of sense to just give people cookies and give them to them for free and make it all work out and make sure you go vote. In fact, I think today is a primary election day in a lot of places. So, I look at all that, and Donald Trump is a mixed bag, just like every other president is a mixed bag. There are things that I like from both parties, and there are things that I absolutely morally detest to my deepest fibers, because I think they are terrible ideas at face value, and then they are typically implemented in a way that makes them even worse. That being said, I was actually kind of bullish on a number of things with Donald Trump. Number one, he's a non-interventionist in theory, in rhetoric, and now we're bombing Iran. That always bugs me. The other thing is he was super anti-CBDC, which I think is a generally good thing. I also quite liked how he wanted to bring energy independence and things in particular in the blockchain space. He spoke at the Bitcoin convention circa 2023, 2024. Talking about how he wanted to make USA a Bitcoin country. So making things like mining easier to do, making things like stablecoin yield easier to do. All of that is generally good. The problem is, he took some of that opportunity to then enrich himself. Things like the Trump coin and the Melania coin, and then a lot of the stuff with World Liberty Financial. And then he's got his son working with USA, is it USA BTC or BTC USA, his big mining operation here in the United States. Again, some of that is a little bit, mining operation, cool. Pump coins on Solana, really, really, really not cool. And the kind of thing that I think even his voters would be critical of. Now, if you look at the statistics, a lot of his voting base is really, really rough right now. When he was elected, in a landslide. People were really excited. And now, if you look at his voters under the age of 40, there is a whole bunch of negativity surrounding the entire thing, because a lot of the promises that he's made, he has not fulfilled. And then a lot of the things that he said were his values, he's explicitly gone the opposite direction on. And I think that really is summarized by two things that we've talked about quite a bit here on Kurt's podcast. And one is the Epstein files, including stuff like, when he talked about, hey, we're gonna put out all the JFK files, we're gonna explain like what really happened there, the world's finally gonna know. So disclosure on that kind of thing. Then like a bunch of the stuff with Doge and cleaning up fraud and all that stuff, people were very excited about. All that got real quiet real quick. And then this Epstein stuff, it turned into, it started with, here's Pam Bondi and a bunch of people showing us the Epstein files. They're on Pam's desk and she's going to show them to us too. Then just a couple months later, it was, there are no Epstein files. The Epstein files are a Democrat hoax designed to make me look bad, Donald Trump. And then they were released thanks to Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie, who deserve a lot of credit for crossing the aisle and for going against the will of a popular president, pushing out the Epstein files. Well, when the Epstein files came out, it showed a ton of connections between the Bitcoin core developers, namely Adam Back, Austin Hill, other funders like Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel, related to what's actually going on. And what's actually going on is horrifying, to say the least. And then ultimately, getting into Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick was mentioned a lot of times in those files. I give the exact number in my article if you want to read it. And, Howard is a guy that I don't particularly like. I've disliked Cantor Fitzgerald, which is his company. He was the CEO from 1990 until 2025. And Howard Lutnick and his company, Cantor, was the counterparty to Tether. And that was a big red flag for me. Tether has always been a big red flag. They've been convicted of fraud multiple times. We know for a fact that they had been running a fractional reserve. Now, people want to hand wave that away as like, well, sure, they got their bank chartered, or they got their bank account closed and all this other stuff. What else were they to do? And I get that, okay? I'm also pragmatic on that. I'm also pragmatic on stablecoins themselves. Stablecoins are a good idea. Stablecoins are one of the primary things that Bitcoin enables to exist. It reduces the friction of commerce, and all of that is great. So, I don't want to start talking about how, Paolo Ordonio and Stuart Hoegner and Riccardo Devasini and Brock Pierce and all these people, like, I think their basic idea around Tether probably started as a generally good idea. And I think that it's even possible that when they came to the point where they were, kind of forced to run a fractional reserve, that might have been a reasonable decision to make in the short term. Now, what has come from that in the future is in realizing when they had to dip their toes into what I think is a clearly fraudulent market, is that they were able to basically print money using wash trading and a bunch of other stuff going on there. And because of the fact that they were able to do all of that, they have turned themselves into not only one of the most powerful entities in the history of the world, literally rivaling the financial power of mid-sized countries today, but they've also used it as leverage in a whole bunch of ways against people like Howard Lutnick, who, after going through some of the details on this stuff, I'm not even sure he's the actual bad guy. I don't think he's a good guy, but I'm starting to think that it's possible that he is in a position where he has some kind of leverage against him, maybe vis-a-vis the Epstein files, but there is something way crazier going on. And so I pose a theory in the article, and I'm going to go over it here through this slide deck, where I think that at some point they got it in their minds over at Tether that, holy cow, we might be able to replace the Federal Reserve System. Like, we might end up being able to become the neo-central bank of the New World Order here. And this is something I've talked about a bit in the past. I've said that term, being the Tetheral Reserve Bank and some of these things. But as I really dove into the mechanisms of it, I think it's becoming very clear that their long-term goal became and has become and is being implemented as essentially a takeover wherein they become the financial issuer of the new world fiat currency via Tether, that the Tetheral Reserve Bank replaces the Federal Reserve and central banks in general, and that they become this decentralized, well, sort of, decentralized is the wrong word. They become the global entity that issues fiat currency as digital tokens. And so while Donald Trump talks about, being opposed to CBDCs, in principle, I think what they could potentially be replaced with in this regard would be much, much worse. And so I'm going to dive into this, but I want everybody first to, again, like, subscribe, hit the alert bell. I also want you to queue up your questions here in the chat box because my presentation will last about 30 minutes. And then after those 30 minutes, I would love to take your questions, comments, blessings, curses, gripes, or gropes. And I also want to give a shout out to the people doing Carbon Chain and Ocean Chain on BSV, because they have pumped up the transaction value or transaction volume rather quite a bit on BSV. And I think that's a generally good thing. In fact, it's something that we absolutely need to happen. So let me find my presentation, and we are going to kick it off here. I'm going to take a little sippy. Ain't that delightful? All right, let's, can I crop this a little bit? Probably not. Full screen layout? Ooh, I can even get rid of myself. Okay, no, I'm going to stay on screen. I styled my hair so I could do this show with you, everybody. All right, so beyond the fraud, Tether's secret plan. See how well I can make this work here. All right, cool. All right, so let's start with just a little bit of backstory again. I also wrote about this in The Invisible Plantation. If you want to read more about the founding of the Federal Reserve Bank and Jekyll Island. So let me pull up my notes here real quick. All righty. So plain and simple. November 1910, rather. 6 men board a private train car in Hoboken, New Jersey, using fake names. It was Senator Nelson Aldrich, representatives from J.P. Morgan, the Rockefellers Family National City Bank, the German banking house Kuhn, Loeb and Company, and these 6 men represented roughly a quarter of the world's wealth. They went to a private island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island, and they spent 9 days writing the legislation that became the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. It was a private cartel. It was designed in secret, and it was given the rubber stamp of the United States government. Why? Well, because they had a bunch of leverage against the United States government. These were the most powerful people in the world, and the United States government had a bunch of debt issues, and so the people that were holding the debt essentially pushed this through the way that they wanted to. And I want you to know that I keep coming back to Jekyll Island. I will continue to bring up Jekyll Island because we're watching the same thing happen now in real time. Except this time the architects are not hiding on an island. They're doing it on the blockchain. They're doing it in Lugano, Switzerland, and they are inside the Department of Commerce, and they didn't even bother with fake names this time. So, wild stuff. The poker cheats. Let me see if there's a way I can have all these windows available so I can see what you're saying at the same time. The answer is probably not. However, can I resize the print larger? Let me see. Let me see if I can blow this up. Can I maximize? Whoa. All right, looks like it's going to work. All right, cool. So there you go. Should be good for now. All right. Poker cheats. This is key too. So every institution is shaped by the people who build it. Who built Tether? Who built Bitfinex? Who built the exchange that shares its parent company? On the left, we have Stuart Hoegner. Hoegner also represented Peter McCormick in one of the cases against Craig Wright. And he was Tether's general counsel from 2014 all the way until January of 2025, which curiously was January 2025 is also when Howard Lutnick left Cantor Fitzgerald to take on his role in the White House. He quietly retired days after the EU MiCA stablecoin regulation. And before he was running compliance for the world's biggest stablecoin, Hoegner was the director of compliance at XCapsa Software, which is a parent company of Ultimate Bet, the online poker platform. Ultimate Bet ran one of the world's most brazen cheating schemes in online gambling history. So from 2003 to 2007, Insiders used God mode on the casino to let them see their opponent's hole cards in real time. So if you were inside Ultimate Bet, you were able to play against your clientele, but using God mode. You could see everybody's cards. You knew what they were betting and why they were betting it, which obviously gives way more than just a little bit of edge. Russ Hamilton, a World Series of Poker champion, was identified as the main person responsible. Players were defrauded somewhere between $22 million and $50 million. Hamilton admitted to it on a secretly recorded tape in 2013. And Hogner was the compliance director. So the guy whose job it was to catch this kind of thing, that's Stuart Hogner. He ended up at Tether until just last year. And then on the right, we have Daniel Friedberg, who worked at the same company during the same time period, who was caught on those same audio tapes discussing a cover-up strategy. Friedberg later became general counsel at FTX Exchange. So two of the biggest fraud cases in internet history, Ultimate Bet and FTX, share a common compliance officer and legal DNA with Tether. And so I just want to be very clear that I don't think any of this is a coincidence, but it is the truth. Forgotten founder. All right, before we get into famous names, we need to talk a little bit about a guy who nobody remembers. I never hear anybody bring this up. I believe it was Bennett Tomlin who published this. Raphael Nicole. I'm probably wrecking that name because he's French. He founded Bitfinex in 2012. I said 20 twice. Before that, he was on the Bitcoin Talk forums. Username was Uncle Scrooge, and he was actively promoting Ponzi schemes in Bitcoin. He invested in Trendon Shaver's Bitcoin Savings and Trust, which Shavers went to federal prison for. Nicole tried to start his own scheme offering 2% returns per week. He built Bitfinex using code copied from Bitcoinica, which is a defunct exchange with massive security problems. If anybody was around at the time, I remember reading about it. I never saw it. I never used it, but Bitcoinica existed at some point. And then Bitfinex, I remember when they popped up shortly thereafter. Vitalik Buterin, of all people, called the early Bitfinex a bucket shop, and it truly was, and frankly, in many ways, probably still is. So that's the foundation of the $145 billion Tether empire. It is a Ponzi promoter's code. All right? And it gets worse, I promise you. So this is just history. I'm going to get to my theory pretty soon here. Brock Pierce, child actor from Disney's Mighty Ducks. He was a co-founder in Tether in 2014. Before he got into Bitcoin, Pierce co-founded the digital entertainment network with Mark Collins Rector. Collins Rector was indicted by a federal grand jury for transporting minors across state lines for illicit activity. I'm not going to get myself demonetized before I get monetized on YouTube, but he was doing some of the worst possible things that you can imagine with children. He fled to Spain. He got picked up by Interpol, extradited, and he pled guilty to 8 counts of enticement with a minor. The charges against Pierce were dismissed, and he was never criminally charged and maintains his innocence. I don't want to overly imply anything else about Brock Pierce, who's a guy who, you know, he's got a lot of weird history, but I also don't want to drag his name through the mud here. However, in the Epstein files that were released just a month and a half ago at this point, there are over 1,800 references to Brock Pierce. And, imply with that what you will, but 1,800 mentions is certainly not nothing. Pierce and Epstein. The files document an 8-year relationship between Pierce and Jeffrey from roughly 2011 until 2019, well after Epstein's 2008 conviction, by the way. Pierce attended a conference on Epstein Island in 2011. That's Little St. James Island. He helped Epstein invest $3 million in Coinbase's Series C, and he introduced Epstein to Steve Bannon. He asked Epstein for dirt on an attorney who was representing Epstein's victims. Okay, so Brock, not looking great here. And then there's the email. The Kiev Independent found an email where a man identified as Pierce told Epstein about a boat full of amazing Ukraine's finest. These were women. Pierce had previously sent Epstein photographs of women from trips to Moscow, Kiev, Odessa, etc., and they're documented in the communications in the Department of Justice file. Pierce says he left Tether in 2015 and transferred his entire ownership stake for $0. Maybe. Okay. But Tether was founded on the reputation of a man who spent nearly a decade in Jeffrey Epstein's orbit. So that's the soil that the company grew out of. All right. This is already, in my opinion, this is looking like a lot. So let's take a moment here. Let's recap, right? So we've got Stuart Hoegner, known compliance officer who absolutely did not find the biggest online gambling fraud that occurred up until that until that moment. We got Freiberg, who ended up who was on the legal team over at Ultimate Bet, didn't solve anything, and then ended up over at FTX, and there's all of that. And then there's Brock Pierce. So these are three major founders of the Bitfinex Tether ecosystem who have very, very dirty backstories. So pretty rough start, but this is just history. Okay, so I'm going to get into the history and I'm going to get into the theory. All right, Pierce and Epstein. Let's move this forward. The Bitfinex hack. This is where stuff started to get weird, okay? August 2nd, 2016, hackers steal 119,000-ish Bitcoin from Bitfinex. It was worth $72 million at the time of the hack, but by 2021, that same Bitcoin was worth over $7 billion. Today, it's worth even more. What Bitfinex did next tells you everything about the company's character, okay? Listen very closely here. They didn't declare the bankruptcy. They didn't limit the losses to the accounts that were hacked. They imposed unilaterally. They didn't ask. They didn't have a vote. They did nothing. They imposed a 36% haircut on every customer at Bitfinex. So if you had money on Bitfinex at the time, you lost 36% of it to cover the losses. Even if you weren't hacked, your money got taken, and in exchange, you got the BFX token, which was an IOU that they created. Later, we found out just a couple of years ago now, and this story still it doesn't read right to me, but this is what the official record says: is that a hacker named Ilya Lichtenstein and his wife Heather Morgan were caught and convicted. Lichtenstein got 5 years. Morgan's case appears to have been dropped, or maybe pending. I couldn't find any information on the status of her. But the point here is the corporate culture. So a company that forces every customer to eat a 36% loss because of their security failure, then converts that loss into equity in their own company. Okay, so they turned their customer base into unwitting participants in what's essentially a confidence game. Like, do you have confidence in Bitfinex? Here's some BFX tokens. You're kind of an investor in the company now. Trust us, bro. It's all going to work out. Let's go here. So the fractional reserve. Let's talk a little bit about what's going on here. October 2021, the CFTC files charges, and the findings are devastating. Tether's USDT was fully backed by reserves for only less than 28%. It was 27.6% of the days in a 26-month sample period between 2016 and 2018. That means for nearly 3/4 of the time, Tether was running a fractional reserve while telling everyone that it was backed 1-to-1. Tethers are dollars as far as you're concerned. Their fine, $41 million. Bitfinex got an additional $1.5 million fine for their participation. Notably, Bitfinex and Tether are both owned by a parent company called iFinex. And that's it. So less than $43 million total against a company that now holds over $140 billion and is also one of the largest holders of U.S. Treasury bonds today. So that's, the analogy I like to give is kind of like getting a speeding ticket for robbing a bank. Okay, so that they walked away with a slap on the wrist for what was ultimately a whole lot of dishonesty and malfeasance there. So let's talk about Crypto Capital Corp real quick here. The New York Attorney General's investigation uncovered something even worse than the rest of it. Bitfinex's payment processor, Crypto Capital Corp, lost excess to $850 million. Okay, $850 million, like almost $1 billion. So Bitfinex quietly transferred $625 million, or perhaps up to $900 million. That part was unclear. Of Tether's own company reserves to cover its own shortfall, and they didn't tell anyone. They didn't tell regulators. They didn't tell their customers. They didn't tell anybody. They just did it. Attorney General Leticia James said it plainly, quote, Bitfinex and Tether recklessly and unlawfully covered up massive financial losses to keep their scheme going to protect their bottom lines. Okay, so that's the quote from the Attorney General. The settlement, $18.5 million. They were banned from operating in New York, which is something that's stuck ever since, and quarterly reserve reporting for 2 years. No admission of wrongdoing. Okay, so despite the fact that they got called out for being brazenly dishonest and unlawful, $18.5 million fine and no admission of wrongdoing, and they have to report on their reserves quarterly for 2 years. Okay, and which is that's already passed now. The best part. Crypto Capital's founder, Ivan Manuel Molina Lee, was arrested in Poland for laundering another $350 million for the Colombian drug cartels. Okay. This was Bitfinex's payment processor. So all this stuff happening directly in the penumbra of the Bitfinex and Tether ecosystem. Riccardo Devasini himself reportedly said, quote, "We are not criminals, but we now have to learn to bank like criminals." That's a quote reported by Bitfinex. Take that as you will. I can't confirm if that was exactly accurate, but you can lean on Bitfinex for the reality there. Let me check my comments real quick, see if there's anything else spicy coming up here. So let's continue to fill the question box here. I'm going to take your questions in the chat in a little bit here on the show after we get through the deck. We're about halfway through at this point. So here's the part that nobody talks about. In 2020, finance professors John Griffin at UT Austin and Amin Shams at Ohio State published a peer-reviewed study in the Journal of Finance. This is not a blog post. This is an academic paper, okay? Journal of Finance. They found that roughly half of Bitcoin's entire 2017 price rise, so this was from less than $1,000 all the way up to the $20,000 peak, could be traced to periods of heavy Tether issuance. So just 1% of trading hours with heavy Tether printing accounted for 50% of Bitcoin's bull run. The pattern was, to quote them, consistent with the supply-driven hypothesis of market manipulation. And it wasn't just Tether printing. A trader on Bitfinex named Spoofy by the researchers was routinely placing $20 to $60 million in fake orders and then canceling them before execution. This is spoofing. It is illegal under the Dodd-Frank regulations, and Bitfinex's own trade engine allowed wash trading by design. You could literally buy and sell from your own orders in order to manipulate the price of Bitcoin. So this was a peer-reviewed, published study that is still largely ignored by the real world. And so now we are 11 years with no audit. Tether's been issuing USDT since 2014. They have $145 billion with a B dollars in circulation today. In over 11 years, they've never received a full and independent audit from a recognized accounting firm. Now, if you check Tether today over on X, they announced today that they have hired a Big Four firm and they are going to go through an audit. Now, they promised they were going to do this in March of 2025, and it never materialized. We'll see. I'm going to give them a month. Let's give them 1 month to make the announcement. Who's the firm? When does the audit happen? Because I'm not confident. But in over 11 years, they've never gone through a serious audit. Their former auditor was Friedman LLP, who was a company that was fined $1.5 million by the SEC for serial violations of federal securities law. And the Big Four accounting firms have all declined so far until today's announcement. So we'll see what it says. But Paulo Ordoino has said in the past that the audit was too complex. Tether and their financial situation was too complex for a Big Four firm to audit in the past, but we'll see what happens. That actually just changed today. Allegedly, the announcement happened today. So they've been saying some version of the audit is coming now for 11 years while collecting $13 billion a year in interest on their reserves that are not verified by anyone. If you had $145 billion, let's play a thought game here, and your entire business model depended on people trusting those reserves, and you'd already been caught lying about those reserves by two separate federal regulators, why would you spend 11 years refusing to prove that you are solvent if you are solvent? Think about it. If you could prove it, why wouldn't you prove it? So here's the thesis. This is where we get to the fun part. I'm gonna take this off. So here's where my thesis is going to start. I'm going to talk about why I think Tether is actually playing a bigger game. I don't think this is about fraud. I don't think this is about wash trading. I don't think this is about spoofing the books for profit. I don't think this is about, putting out paper and then trying to wash it, with retail's actual dollars and all this stuff. Like, all of that is well documented. You can read all kinds of people talking about how Tether and Bitfinex is a fraud game or some kind of, money laundering scheme or whatever. And I think it is, but I don't think that's the actual game. I don't think that's the end game. I think that was the start game, and I think that might have been the goal at the beginning. But I think that they figured out over the last few years that what they could actually do is become the New World Order Tetheral Reserve Bank, and that's where I think this is going. So please pay attention. The Tetheral Reserve Bank. Everything I've told you so far is old news, right? Epstein connections, gambling cheats, real and documented, okay? That's the startup phase. Here's what they're building. Tether by the numbers, $141 billion in United States Treasury securities. That makes Tether the 7th largest foreign buyer of U.S. Treasuries in the world. They purchased $33.1 billion in 2024, which surpasses Canada, Mexico, Norway, and Germany. Tether holds more U.S. government debt than the governments of the United Arab Emirates, Australia, and South Korea, all of which are allies, by the way. $13 billion in net profit in 2024, nearly $5 billion in Q2 of 2025. They also have 143 tons of gold stored in a Swiss nuclear bunker, okay? This is all just off of being the bank of crypto, okay? Now they're vertically integrating into Bitcoin mining. They've got $2 billion in mining infrastructure across 15 sites, $100 million stake in BitDeer, which is Jihan Wu's latest mining vehicle, no sovereign backstop, no elected oversight, and $140 billion in government debt. And nobody voted for this, okay? Nobody's involved in getting a say in all of this stuff, but they're putting themselves very tightly ingrained into the United States monetary system. Now, this mechanism is elegant and ruthless. Step one, and I'll walk you through it. Issue USDT. Step two, collect dollars from the people buying those tokens. Step three, buy U.S. Treasury bills through Cantor Fitzgerald. And step four, earn interest on $141 billion. Step five, share none of that yield with USDT holders. Remember, if you're a USDT holder, you are actually providing the liquidity for them to do this. And if you were doing this through a bank, you'd be getting 3-4% interest at least, right? But that's not happening, okay? So this is seigniorage. This is the profit of that a government earns by issuing currency. And when the U.S. government prints a dollar and you hold it, the government earns interest on the debt instruments backing the dollar. You earn nothing, okay? That's the deal. That's the deal that Tether has given us. So if you hate the Federal Reserve System and you hate fiat currency and you hate central banking in general, USDT is doing everything you hate, and they're not even giving you any of the interest on the assets that you hold. So Tether is a private company in the British Virgin Islands, and they're running the same play. They issue a globally accepted currency, collect yield, pass none of it back. $13 billion a year, tax-free, operating from a jurisdiction with no income tax, no extradition treaties for most of the world. If the Federal Reserve did this, there would be congressional hearings. There would be, imagine your typical gold bug libertarian. Imagine Peter Schiff understanding that this is going on and the things that would be said about this. But Tether, they just do it. They do it on a daily basis, and they've been doing it for more than a decade. And it's just mind-blowing to me. So if Tether is building a private central bank, I want you to realize Howard Lutnick, who's a guy that I don't particularly like at this point, he's the inside man, okay? Lutnick was the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, which is one of the primary dealers in the U.S. of U.S. Treasury securities, okay? So if you are going to buy bonds, U.S. debt, and whatever, Cantor Fitzgerald is one of the major firms that you would go to do this. This is if you were J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, you would likely go to Cantor Fitzgerald to acquire the assets here, and that's also where Tether goes. Tether only goes to Cantor Fitzgerald. Howard Lutnick is now the 41st Secretary of Commerce. He is in so many pictures and videos standing right over the shoulder of President Donald Trump, okay? They are the custodian of Tether's entire treasury bond portfolio. Tens of millions of dollars a year in revenue from that custodial relationship. So remember, Cantor Fitzgerald is profiting immensely from being this custodial partner. Cantor negotiated a 5% equity stake in Tether. So when we talk about Tether, we're also talking about 5% of Tether is Cantor Fitzgerald. And so at Tether's target valuation of like $500 billion, that stake is worth about $25 billion bucks. Congratulations, Lutnick family. More than all of Cantor Fitzgerald's other assets combined. So, you could say, hey, Cantor Fitzgerald is a big finance company. They're holding equity in all kinds of other companies. Good for them. No, Tether is their biggest customer, and it's the biggest asset on their portfolio. Ricardo Devasini told an investor named Corey Swan that Lutnick got his stake bloody cheap. Okay, bloody cheap is a direct quote from Ricardo Devasini, according to Corey Swan. When Lutnick became the Commerce Secretary, and this is really, really key, he is required by law to divest. Now, I know Nancy Pelosi plays the books and does all this stuff too, but when you get elected to public office, there are certain things that you're not allowed to participate in. Lutnick transferred Cantor Fitzgerald trusts, or two trusts, benefiting his 4 children, which should be an ethics requirement, right? So here's where it becomes really, really wild. At that moment, one of those trusts, called Dynasty Trust A, borrowed money from Tether. The loan was secured by the convertible bonds representing Cantor's equity stake in Tether. A UCC1 financing statement filed in New York on October 7, 2024 documents the whole thing. You can check this out. Ethics professor Kathleen Clark says, quote, "This transaction was supposed to theoretically eliminate a conflict of interest, but it actually creates a new one. Tether financed the divestiture that was supposed to free Lutnick from Tether's influence." Okay. So the Commerce Secretary's children now owe their fortune to Tether's solvency, and Lutnick helped draft the Genius Act, which is the big conversation for the last year and a half when it comes to stablecoins and all this other stuff going on. So the stablecoin bill that gave Tether a 3-year grace period, by the way, from all the compliance in it. During the Senate confirmation, Lutnick said, and I'm quoting, "I absolutely agree with you. Tether should be audited." And yet no audit has materialized. Now let's talk about the Lutnick connection to Jeffrey Epstein, which is not great. Over 250 references to Howard Lutnick in the newly released Epstein files. He purchased a property next to Epstein's Upper East Side townhouse through a trust for $10. Okay, $10. Lutnick says he cut ties with Epstein in 2025, but the files show contact continuing through at least 2017. They show a 2012 island visit, a 2013 email, a 2015 Clinton fundraiser invitation, and a 2017 Epstein donation of $50,000 to a group specifically honoring Lutnick for his work at Cantor Fitzgerald. So two of the most important people in Tether's orbit, its co-founder and its financial custodian, both appear extensively in the Epstein files. And I can't tell you that that's directly related to Tether's operations, but the pattern should be looked at. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And at this point, I think you can probably see there's a lot of smoke. So let's talk a little bit about some of this stuff. Setting aside Epstein, the self-dealing alone is pretty crazy. Northern Data AG, a German company, majority owned by Tether. They sold their Bitcoin mining subsidiary, Peak Mining, in a deal worth $200 million. And the buyers were Highland Group Mining and Appalachian Energy, entities controlled by Giancarlo Devasini and Paolo Ordonio. Paolo is now the CEO of Tether, by the way. Tether's own executives were on both sides of a $200 million deal. Northern Data is listed on a German market segment that doesn't require disclosure or transactions, and there was no legal obligation to tell anyone. And then Rumble. So I actually decided not to put this episode on Rumble for this reason. So pay attention here. Rumble has Tether financial ties. There was a bid of $767 million to acquire all of Northern Data. So the executives buy the subsidiary's assets, and then the affiliated entity buys the parent company. So that's the playbook. In that, Rumble also now has its equity pulled up into the Tether ecosystem. So this is the new Jekyll Island. What are we actually looking at? Let's get to the summary here. So there is a small group of private actors, principally Riccardo Devasini and Paolo Ardoino and the Lutnick family. They've positioned themselves an unaudited offshore company to function structurally like a central bank. Number one, it issues globally accepted currency, and there's $145 billion worth of it in circulation. Two, it holds sovereign debt on a scale rivaling medium-sized nations like Canada and Germany, okay? 3, it earns seigniorage, $13 billion a year in interest. That's the profit that a government would collect for issuing currency. Number 4, the Commerce Secretary's family owes their fortune to this company's solvency, to Tether's solvency. And number 5, it answers to no electorate, no legislature, no auditor, no nation state. Now, I want to be extra double clear here. I am not a defender of the Federal Reserve. The Fed is itself a private cartel, and they have a public mandate of sorts that was created in secret and operated for its member banks, and it's responsible for destroying 98% of the dollar's purchasing power since 1913. The Federal Reserve is, frankly, an evil system, and I believe Bitcoin was designed in part to provide an alternative to this system. But Bitcoin, I mean, this is all tangled up into the hijacking of Bitcoin narrative and Epstein and all this other stuff. Tether is governed by Giancarlo Devasini, okay? And at least one chairman of the Federal Reserve can't secretly loan money to his children's trust fund, but that's what Tether is able to do. They're able to buy off the Commerce Secretary, control it, and get themselves into just an incredible amount of power just with their leverage. So in my opinion, they're staging a quiet, methodical coup against the global monetary system. That's what I think is at stake here. That's what I think they're doing. And they're doing it to become the new center of control. It may not look like global central banking, but they are designing something new. And I believe they see themselves as the true central bank of what I think we could call the New World Order. So they're using that $140 billion in U.S. government debt as leverage, and the U.S. Commerce Secretary's family is on the payroll, and nobody has stopped them. And frankly, at this point, I'm not even really sure how to do it. Like, how do you stop them at this point? So pretty scary stuff. I'm going to shut this in a second here. And I want to encourage you, please put your questions in the chat. I will be answering the questions here. I'll scroll back and get to your questions. So if you have other questions, comments, blessings, horses, grapes, or gropes, if you want to change the subject, by all means, let's do it. So that's the story here. That's what Tether is up to. The full article, if you read it, it has 35 footnotes at kurtwalkerjr.com. Every claim I made tonight or today, this afternoon, is sourced from primary documents. It's from the CFTC filings. It's from the New York Attorney General's office. It's Department of Justice records, Bloomberg's reporting, as well as peer-reviewed academic papers, UCC filings, etc. So if you think this story matters, if you want people to understand what's actually going on with stablecoins, particularly Tether, in the blockchain space, please share this stream. I think we did about 20 minutes here explaining the history and the mechanisms of what I think is going to become the Tetheral Reserve Bank. Please share the article. It would mean a lot to me. And the fact of the matter is that the mainstream financial press has been dancing around this for years. And I think a lot of that is ignorance. I think they just don't know. But also, I don't know what other malice could be involved there. They might have leverage on more people than we're even aware of. So what I'm not saying, I want to be very clear here. I'm not telling you that Tether is going to collapse tomorrow. I think it's much worse. Tether has made itself too big to confront and too big to fail. And that's the strategy. I think that's always been the strategy, or at least for the last 7 or 8 years. I think they realized that with the power that they have, just like the Federal Reserve has the power to create war and profit from it, Tether has realized that they have a similar power, but it might be exponential because of the nature of the speed that they can engage in this commerce. So thanks for watching that whole part. God bless on that front. So I'm going to start going through the commentary, questions and comments here. I'll start pulling these up. way beyond fraud. Absolutely. It's ridiculous. This is really important here. Voting is tacit consent trying to drag us all to hell with them. I agree. I stopped voting in 2012. I think voting is absolutely consent to being governed, regardless of who wins. If you participate in the election, you are putting your personal endorsement on the concept that people can be governed by the system that is elected. And I can't do that for moral reasons. I just won't participate. Greetings from Punk Rock, New Jersey. What's up? Good to see you, brother. Joey, you're not allowed to be late, man. Whole lot from sweaty Northwest Florida. It's warm here today too. Southeast Florida is got the swelter going on, so it's pretty good. Yeah, I don't understand stable coins, how anything tethered to a collapsing fiat currency is stable. It's a good point. Honestly, it's mostly functional because of the unit of account and the fact that they inflate their way into being useful in the short term, and they just keep issuing debt. The Keynesian cycle is itself pretty interesting. Let me talk a little bit about the Keynesian cycle real quick. So John Maynard Keynes, was a British monetary thought leader, and he came up with this notion that if you issue debt in a way that gives you the ability to invest in technology, both commercial technology and military technology, government technology, et cetera, it allows you to create a cycle whereby the nation that is issuing the asset is able to then create momentum in their own economy such that their economy can grow. And if their economy grows faster than its competitors, then the debt itself is sustainable. The debt is seen as a justifiable cost to making it that the other countries cannot compete with you. So it allows you to leapfrog the countries you're competing with. Now, the U.S. has taken that idea and they've gone a whole, an extra 1,000 miles with it with modern economic theory, which is based on Keynesian economics. And so I understand in a pure Machiavellian sense why it feels like a good idea if you're the guy running the till at the government. But ultimately, it's devaluing the assets in the bank accounts of the people in the country. And that's why it is problematic. This is why we should reject Keynesian economics at face value. But thank you for bringing that up. But Kurt, the Fed tells me there's nothing wrong with printing money. Yeah, and that's why it puts them in power, keeps them in power, and also makes for an interesting economic shell game that admittedly, when you're in the country that benefits from that massive privilege, it actually makes sense in the short term, but it makes it that you cannot climb the rungs of the ladder, and that's the real problem. Kurt, is Tether just digitizing the 1913 fractional reserve monetary system? Am I on the right track? Essentially, yes. They are. Tether is putting themselves in a position. They learned the lessons of Jekyll Island, and they are applying them to the new financial system, and they're doing it to a tremendous profit for themselves. Let's see. Why does BDO attest to Tether's reserve? I don't know that they do, and I'm not sure which firm it's going to be that ends up doing the work. So we'll see. In short, not a question, but your continued efforts within the BSV space, along with your consistency and wisdom, does not go unappreciated by all within the space. You're not told enough. Thank you, Casey. First of all, let me say thank you. I appreciate your question, your comments. I appreciate the stuff that you're doing in the BSV space as well. I really see BSV as our last chance, truly, at resisting the total fiat takeover of the universe. The BTC people have joined the fiat universe. The Tether people, they're all intertwined, and BSV is Bitcoin, and BSV is Bitcoin's last chance to give people the power to be self-sovereign, to do peer-to-peer commerce, and to truly make the world a better place with the power of free market economics. It is the last tool for free market economics to exist amid this invisible plantation in which we live. So thank you. I appreciate it. It really means a lot. Too big to confront, too big to fail. Any link to the resignation of SEC Enforcement Director Margaret Ryan on March 16th after only 6 months following clashes with agency leaders? So really good question and kind of a deep one. Now, Margaret Ryan in particular, I think she's just a symptom of a bigger thing. We just saw Joe Kent resign this last week, and a lot of people have left the Trump administration with a big negative bit on the way out and saying like, hey, I agreed to serve this government under the premise of what Donald Trump campaigned on. And Donald Trump is a tremendous campaigner. I think a lot of what he campaigned on were genuinely good ideas. I didn't agree with all of them, but I think some of his biggest ideas were quite good ideas. And it is just the tragedy of a decade that since being elected, that he has reneged on some of the most important things that he campaigned on. I think it's bad for the Republican Party. I think it's bad for the United States. I think it's bad for all kinds of things. But what it's good for, the real lesson here, is that you cannot vote yourself out of power or into power, right? We can't vote for somebody that's going to make us more free. It just doesn't work. And we keep getting tricked into thinking that if we just vote for the right person, it's going to work. But I tell you what, and I want you to really commit this to your heart, that if voting could actually change anything that mattered, it would be illegal. And so the fact that you're allowed to vote tells you that it is the thing that allows you to keep yourself in that invisible plantation. And I'm going to keep using that terminology because that's exactly what it is. I call every nation state a plantation because it's exactly what it is. It is a tax plantation. You're not allowed to cross the border without permission. You are not allowed to be there without paying taxes and tribute up the chain. And you're not allowed to even, you're not allowed practically any means by which you can leave that plantation. And that's exactly what it is. This is slavery writ large. It's just a bigger plantation, and the shackles are a little nicer, but it is still a plantation nonetheless. Can you rank your top 3 economists and why they're ranked where they are? I think, man, top 3, that's pretty hard. I'm a big fan of Milton Friedman, who'd point. He was an Austrian educated Mises, Mises in the Mises world. I think Friedrich Hayek is another really key one. You can look at Adam Smith, actually, if you want to get to the foundations. If you get to first principles, Adam Smith is tremendous. But I think today, the greatest living economist and the person that people should be paying attention to, everything that he says about the modern economy, in my opinion, is absolutely right. And that's Thomas Sowell. So if you read Thomas Sowell, who still tweets, by the way, he's got to be 95 years old at this point. One of the most brilliant free market thinking minds, very libertarian focused, understands both the depth of monetary theory, but also the simplicity of how macroeconomics and microeconomics are integrated into the real lives of real people. Thomas Sowell is a gem. It is going to be like that. That's one, like, I'm going to shed a tear when Thomas Sowell finally goes to be with our Heavenly Father here. So absolutely Thomas Sowell. But yeah, I'm going to stick with that. So what did I say? Friedman, Hayek, Smith, and Sowell. Those are my top 4. Sowell's the only one who's alive still, so he gets the number 1 spot. And Sowell is just a gem to the nth degree. So thank you for the question. I really appreciate it. Public service should be like jury duty. Yeah, indeed. Kurt, have you heard if anyone is building a payment app built on the BSV blockchain so we can start using BSV like Apple Pay for daily life payments for goods and services? Actually, Orange Gateway, I believe, just made an announcement that they have a point of sale tool that is out or coming out and really, really cool. So Thor, his real name is Cleaner, which is Icelandic for, let's just say, Thor. They're a really cool company, and Orange Gateway is doing a lot of really cool stuff. And actually, Orange Gateway, if you would like to sponsor Kurt's podcast, I would love to send you the deck. We would love to have you as a sponsor here on the show. I love what you guys are doing. You guys are making the world a better place just by focusing on what matters. So check out Orange Gateway. If you check them out on X, they made an announcement 3 or 4 days ago about their point of sale system that they have coming out. And I would be willing to bet that it's pretty good because the stuff that they're building is good stuff. Where are the good guys? Where are the regulators? Where are the sane people? So the sane people are here in the chat box. The only sane people you will find, we have 137 viewers watching live right now. Those are the sane people, and everybody else should not be trusted. There's very few people. And frankly, you wouldn't know who they are because if you are particularly sane, if you refuse to be bought, if you refuse to be threatened, you end up not getting very popular because all of the rails of communication and popularity are controlled by the bad people. And so it's pretty rough to get content out there. How do you feel about voting for local government at the city level? Is any voting consent to all of it? I have mixed feelings about this. And the reason being is I know people in real life who run for and function in local offices. I think there could be a distinction drawn where if you are voting for something in your city, that you're only consenting then to the government of your city, which maybe is a compromise I'd be willing to make. I haven't done it in a long time. I don't vote at all, but for somebody I know personally, somebody like I actually go to church with locally elected officials and things. And so maybe I'd have to really think about it, pray on it, make a decision based on maybe the particulars of a case-by-case basis, but still, principally, you're consenting to be governed at least at the level at which you're voting, which I don't like in principle. So how do we wake up XRP people? I don't think that's possible. The XRP people are opportunists. They just want XRP to go up in value, and they think that XRP getting integrated into the real world economy is that thing that's going to make them very wealthy. And I think that's the entirety of their values, right? I don't think the XRP people want to change the XRP people don't want to change the world. The XRP people want to change the value of their portfolio. And I think that's likely the case for 99% of them. And I would say it's probably a lost cause. They're not allies, they're opportunists. I have friends trying to educate them on BSV. They only see the surface propaganda, and BSV website does not inspire them. I'm having them try to listen to Dr. Craig Wright. It's not a bad place to start. I think if you can get people to actually care about not just the technology or the financial opportunity, but the why, like the deep underlying why, like that would be your best bet. Like you got to speak to people's hearts. You got to inspire them to join for reasons other than opportunism. And if you can do that, then you can build a great ally. But Craig was quite good at that, which is why I really miss his public speaking persona, because he was so good at explaining not just the how. He's also good at explaining the how, but he was tremendous at explaining the why. And so I'm doing my best to fill that gap if I can. Can anyone learn to mine BSV? It's actually pretty easy. You can buy an ant miner and you can plug it in at your house and you can run it. It's inefficient and it's not profitable, but if you wanted to check out gorillapool.com, we offer a hosting solution that is about a third of the price of residential electric power cost. And so that's a way that you can make it work better for you, but it's admittedly still not particularly great. But it's not a difficult thing to do. I bet you can learn it in an afternoon. You can really just kind of copy, paste, and follow directions. Connect to Gorilla Pool's Stratum server, and you can be mining in an afternoon. It's not difficult. Hi, Kurt from Wales. Good to see you. No, I appreciate my Welsh viewers. Kurt, I agree. This is my health world. Yeah, RE censorship, indeed. Kung Tech Fu, I fully accept as a full BSV Dr. Craig Wright person, my videos will not go viral. I don't think that's entirely true. I was actually just kind of going through my back catalog of content. I have interviews that I've done that have hit 40, 50,000 views. Now, admittedly, that's not your, I would love to have 5 million views on a piece of content, right? But that's got to be earned. Like the content itself has to be valuable. And I think when we talk about just BSV, I think it's such a difficult conversation to start with. Like Bitcoin itself is not that big of a deal globally. Like people don't really understand Bitcoin outside of like the ticker price. And this is still your average human being thinks of Bitcoin as some kind of weird stock or something. And so to then have a conversation about the side pot conversation about the particulars of BSV, like you are losing a lot of people. And that's a little bit why I started this show. And I want to talk more about not just Bitcoin or not just BSV, but also how those things intertwine into the real economy. This is why I've been talking about like the Epstein news. I've been talking about Trump and the Iran war. I've been talking about macroeconomics and history to a degree. And then today doing this episode about Tether, like I'm trying to tie things back into the real world so that people can understand why Bitcoin matters. And if people can understand why Bitcoin matters, then the BSV conversation makes a lot more sense. So I think it's a little bit, it's incumbent on us to make sure that the content makes sense to the viewer. Because if you just want to talk about why BSV is the real Bitcoin, you're asking somebody to understand Bitcoin. And that is too big of a question for almost everybody at this point. But thank you. Thank you for the feedback. Kurt Hazlitt, Henry Hazlitt. Economics in One Lesson is much better economist than Hayek, in my opinion. I don't disagree. I like Hazlitt as well. Was just put on the spot there. No, I have no criticisms with Hazlitt, so no big deal. No Rothbard or Mises. Those guys were the best. No, I agree, actually, especially Mises. I think Rothbard Rothbard's a little edgier on the anarchist side, and I think Mises was a little more metered and thoughtful. But I like both guys too. I don't disagree with Rothbard or Mises. Actually, if you read both of them and you see how they complement each other, I think there's a lot to love about Rothbard and Mises. So no criticisms there. If someone wants to find Dr. Craig, you can find it. I am on a Dr. Craig Wright learning journey. Very refreshing to unlearn, relearn, and learn again about the ecosystem. Yes, why it matters. There really is a greater vision at work. Indeed. So I'm going to wrap there. I want to thank everybody for watching. It means the world to me. The people that especially tune in live and ask the questions here in the chat. You give me something to do every Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that means the world to me. I'm going to leave you with a challenge, just like I do every episode, and it's be good to each other. I think the whole problem with all of this is that everybody is just trying to get themselves into positions of greater power. And when your desire is power, almost nothing good can ever come from that, except perhaps as an accidental, circumstantial consequence of doing such a thing. But truly, our goal should be to be good to each other. It's love your neighbor as yourself, as it's been said by a great many brilliant people. But everybody, that's the stuff that matters. I really appreciate all of you who like, subscribe, and hit the alert bell. If you could share this with people, let them know that the subscriptions genuinely mean the world to me. I would appreciate that very much. Please tune in every week at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Share around. Let everybody know. Let everybody know that we're doing this stuff, that we do deep dives and we take questions from the box. I love doing these live with you. Truly is a blessing. So I will see you, God willing, next week at 2. And be well, everybody. Take care. It's been my pleasure. Talk soon.